Hello everyone, welcome back to the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. Hope you're having an amazing day. Now before we start today's video, I just need to clarify something very, very urgently. When I said that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were Western chauvinists, this is by no means an attack on Marxists personally. Now, even Confucius, for example, was a sexist by today's standards, as was the Buddha. But I would not consider it to be an attack on me if you said that Confucius had certain regressive views by today's standards. So I just want to clarify that I don't have a problem with Marxism being taught in Asia. Of course not. It might or might not be the dominant state ideology of Asia in the future. Many of you dogmatic Marxists, of course, think that Marxism is the only way forward, but I disagree because I do think that Marxism is not a bad system, but it's just one of many different possible systems. And I'm certainly not opposed to Marxism being used in the political functions of a country. What I mean by that is that I'm not opposed to Marxism playing a role in the governance of a country. But I still think that our central identity, this is my personal opinion, our central identity cannot be Karl Marx. It has to be based around an Eastern figure like Confucius or Buddha. That's just my opinion. You can disagree with me if you want, that's fine. But no, I don't have a problem with Marxists, and I'm happy to collaborate with Marxists. In fact, if I were the leader of Malaysia, doubt I can actually be the leader of Malaysia because I'm not Malay, but well, if I were the leader of Malaysia, I'd even be happy to have advisors in the government who are Marxists. And I'd be happy to endorse a Marxist political party, even if I don't align with all their views completely. See, I am a Marxist in the same way that I am a Christian or a Muslim. Now, I think that there are many good teachings in Christianity or Islam, but I would not identify as either a Christian or a Muslim, because if I were to do that, that would make me a phony, correct? You don't necessarily have to call yourself a Christian or a Muslim, correct? I read Marxist literature just for intellectual stimulation and to get ideas from them. I'm not so close-minded as to think we can't learn from people with different ideologies from ours. But fundamentally, I'm more of a Confucian socialist like Sun Yat-sen rather than a Marxist in the Leninist way of thinking. I have read Lenin's State and Revolution, I've read the Communist Manifesto, I've read Engels's Origin of the Family, and I've also read the first book of Das Kapital, but by no means does that qualify me to call myself a Marxist, because I don't think that would be fair to the Marxists if I were to call myself a Marxist, because that would be a dishonest description of myself. I like to think of myself as a Confucian socialist because my worldview is more Confucian rather than Marxist. But it doesn't mean that I think Marxism is a bad worldview. It's just different from mine, yes? And if a Marxist government were to run a country, but run it with benevolence, and run it with propriety, then I have no issue towing the line of that so-called Marxist government. So, yeah. So I'm not hostile. I'm not a reactionary. I'm not hostile to you. But at the same time, I think to call me a Marxist would be an insult to actual Marxists, because I still have a paucity of knowledge when Marxism is concerned. And you know, to call me a communist would be an insult to the likes of people like Chin Peng, because I don't have the discipline to struggle in the jungle for my socialist beliefs. Anyway, let's get on to today's video. Without further ado, let's play the Internationale. Now, the American right-winger Jackson Hinkle has been trending on Twitter lately, in case you haven't noticed, with over 2 million followers, making him one of the most visible voices. And I know that whenever you criticize Hinkle, or whenever you bring up any of Hinkle's problematic social views, his followers will attack you as if they've been stung by 1,000 hornets, and people automatically shut down the moment you start attacking Hinkle, at least when you attack his character. So this video is not going to be attacking Hinkle's character or Hinkle's affiliation with problematic characters like Gonzalo Lira, but it's merely to serve as a sober material analysis on Hinkle's words when it concerns the Houthis. Now, a few months ago, or was it a few weeks ago, Hinkle was praising, or at least appearing to give praise to Yemen's Houthis, saying that those people were born with a gun in their hand, so to speak. Yes, Hinkle actually said that children in Yemen were born with a gun in their hand. And you have all these Western people whose children will probably never see combat, praising the Houthis and basically fawning over them as being real men. And I was very, very uncomfortable with that. And so I brought up my concerns on Twitter, and I said that, look, you know, of course, while the Houthis are playing, objectively speaking, a revolutionary role against Israel's Zionist imperialist regime, and we ought to offer the Houthis critical support, I don't think it's the right thing to do to be basically adultifying children in the global south. And somebody on Twitter actually responded to me and said that this is what happens when Asia imports Western labels. Apparently, when I said that children should be at school and playing with their friends and not on a battlefield fighting wars that ought to be fought by adults, that makes me Western-centric. And this is actually a form of Orientalism that people don't realize when they think that, you know, children in the global south are somehow different from children in the global north. As if children in the global south are not in fact children, but rather miniature adults who in fact don't need to have a normal childhood like any child in the global north. But what makes you think that our children are any different from your children? What makes you think that our children want different things from your children? That your children want to go to school and, well, no, they don't really want to go to school, but they want to play with their friends, they want to study, not all the time, but sometimes, and they want to do things that normal children do. But apparently children in the global south want to be soldiers. That children in the global south are somehow different from your children. And the only noun I can think to define it with is Orientalism, the belief that children in different parts of the world are inherently different from each other. America likes to condemn other countries for human rights abuses, but it doesn't like to think about its own problematic recent past that has not been wiped clean off the slate of many African Americans even today. Now, you may be familiar with this boy named George Stinney. Now, George Stinney was an African American boy who lived in the Jim Crow era of America, and he was also the only 14-year-old person in America to be executed by electric chair. Now, we all know that Stinney was basically coerced into giving a confession that was indeed a false confession, because they couldn't find the murderer and they needed a scapegoat. the easiest scapegoat to make was the little black boy who just so happened to have been interacting with the murder victims. So, on trumped up charges of murdering 2 white girls, George Stinney was executed by electric chair, the youngest person in America to be executed in the 20th century. Mind you, this didn't occur in the 19th century. This occurred in the 20th century. Has there ever been any white boy who was executed in America at the tender age of 14, when most of us are still bloody immature? I've had 14-year-old students before, and they're still bloody immature. No. And this is precisely because of the adultification of the colonized children. The treatment of the colonized children, not as children, but as miniature adults, in order to dehumanize them and basically absolve yourself of any feelings of guilt if anything should happen to them. Yes, I'm aware that George Stinney was not a colonized subject in the strictest sense of the word. He wasn't born in Africa, he was born in America. And he was tried in America as an adult rather than a child. Because the only way that you can justify giving the death penalty to a 14-year-old is if you treat the 14-year-old not as a 14-year-old boy, but as a 14-year-old mini-man. And, well, even though George Stinney was posthumously pardoned by the United States, it really doesn't make a difference, does it? Because he's dead. And the fact of the matter is that he might still be alive today if he had not been adultified, treated as an adult and not given the benefit of the doubt, because they could not find the killer of those girls. Now, adultification of children can be divided into 2 types of adultification. Now, on one hand, you have benevolent adultification of the colonized. In the case of people like Jackson Hinkle, who praise the Houthis for using child soldiers, even though he knows that his own children are not likely to ever grow up becoming child soldiers. And he knows that his own children will grow up in safety and security because he lives in a first world country and he's a white man from an upper middle class family in America. Correct? So it's easy for Westerners to fetishize global South conditions, to romanticize harsh global South conditions, when they know that they themselves will never be subjected to them. It's, for example, very condescending for people from Western countries, from affluent Western countries, to come to places like Thailand, for example, and say, you know what, these people are happy with less, or these people are happy to subsist with less. Why is it that, you know, our poor Americans are so ungrateful? Not only, I've seen this attitude in people like Thomas Sowell, for example. They'll say, you look at how people in global South countries are so poor and so desperate, yet they don't complain. Why can't our poor Americans be like that? It not only demonstrates an intense hostility to the poor, but also the reason global South countries are poor is because your countries in the global North cannot get your boot heel off us. That's exactly why, right? So that's another form of condescension when you romanticize people going through harsh material conditions in the global South with a stiff upper lip. And that to me is a form of Orientalism. And it's also a form of Orientalism when you praise the Houthis for using child soldiers because it justifies your manly man right-wing politics. Because children are not political tools to be used by you in order to justify or to further your own political agenda. Children should be at school. They shouldn't be soldiers. That's my main point. So that's what we mean by benevolent adultification. And then you have the malignant adultification with, you know, children like George Stinney being treated like adults and tried as adults because they are viewed fundamentally as subhuman on account of being a certain race or religion, correct? And we see the same thing with Palestinian children, because for Zionists it is very difficult to actually see Palestinian children as children. In fact, I have literally seen Zionists, not just Jewish Zionists, but Christian Zionists, saying things like, there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. As if a 10-year-old boy was some anti-Semitic Nazi commando. And that to me is one of the vilest things you can say, to basically compare children with Nazi commandos. Because the fact of the matter is that many of the children in Gaza, even if they throw stones at soldiers, even if they throw stones at tanks, are not angry at the Israelis because they're Jewish. They're angry at the Israelis because the Israelis are oppressing them. Correct? So yeah, it seems to me that children in the global south do not have the luxury of being seen as children by people in the global north. And that's a very, very, very repugnant thing in my view. But just to wrap up this video, I have to say that no, our children are not different from your children, and they deserve the right to a happy childhood just like any child in the global north. Our people are not any different from your people, yeah? So when you say shit like LGBT is Western imperialism disguised, and you say that, you know, it's a psyop in order to promote Western values, that itself is Orientalism, because you are treating the global south as your own political pawn. Basically, you're basically using the global south in order to further your anti-gay or anti-trans agenda, as if gay and trans people didn't exist in the global south. And to me, that is absolutely repugnant. That itself is Orientalism, because you're projecting your own bigotry on every single person in the global south. And you are treating the global south as your political pawns in order to further your own anti-gay, anti-trans agenda, when in fact you don't care about Eastern culture, you don't care about Eastern society, and you're never going to move to the global south. You're going to stay in the West, and you're going to say that gay and trans people in the global south are agents of imperialism. And that, to me, is absolutely repugnant. Repugnant isn't even a strong enough word to describe what you're doing, because you're acting as if global south people are inherently different from global north people. As if gay and trans people don't exist in the global south. As if our children are different from your children. And our children should not have a right to go to school and have a normal childhood like your children. So, we are not your pawns. Let me just say this very clearly, in a manner that cannot be misinterpreted. We are not your pawns in order to further your political agenda, whether that be your anti-gay, anti-trans agenda, or whether that be, you know, your right-wing worldview agenda. People in the global south are not your pawns that you can use and discard like broken toys once you no longer need us. And no, we don't need any condescending saviors, right? I'm going to make another video of this, but a lot of people are very angry at me because apparently I'm not grateful for Jackson Hinkle's Palestine support. Apparently people in the Global South ought to be grateful to Jackson Hinkle because he's a white Christian Anglo-Saxon man who supports Palestine. Well, that's the bare minimum you should be doing anyway, correct? And no, we don't have to like anybody who supports Palestine, and we don't have to endorse anyone who supports Palestine, because that itself is Western chauvinism. You know, the idea that the only way the salvation of the Global South can be attained is through the West. No, it isn't. We don't need the West. We can be the masters of our own destiny without you. Thank you very much.